All right, welcome back, everybody. We are answering your questions and we are just going to get right back to it. Of course, I have to get back to my screen with the questions on them. I think the next couple of questions are both from Natalie, but we'll do them one at a time. So, Shannon, Natalie asks, are 401k contributions still going to be added back as an untaxed income for October 1st, 2022 FAFSA? And she says, as a result of the CARES Act changes to the FAFSA.
Right. So what she is talking about, the October 1st, 2022 FAFSA, that's the start date, October 1st, 2022, when you can complete the FAFSA for the 2023-24 school year. And what Natalie is referring to here is she references the CARES Act. It's not actually the CARES Act. The CARES Act was legislation that was passed back in March, but there was COVID relief, an additional COVID relief package that went through in legislation at the end of December. It doesn't have a nice, short, sweet name like the CARES Act, but in the midst of this about 5,000 page bill, there was a little 200-page section at the end about FAFSA simplification that made a lot of changes to the FAFSA form itself, reducing it from 108 questions, as it is in its current state, to, for the 23-24 school year, will be reduced down to 36 questions. So a dramatic cut in the number of questions on the FAFSA. And one of the items on the FAFSA that looks like it is going away based on that legislation is the counting of 401k contributions as untaxed income. This has always been kind of a rumor that's been floating around that if you contribute more to your 401k, that will reduce your adjusted gross income, and therefore, you'll look poorer, so you'll qualify for more financial aid. This has always been a myth floating around that we've had to debunk all the time, but it looks like, as I read this new legislation, that it's not going to be a myth anymore, that they got rid of a bunch of questions about untaxed income, and it looks like the 401k contributions are included in that bunch that's going away. So I do not believe they are going to ask about your 401k contributions anymore on the FAFSA. Now, a few caveats to that, because this is not one of those short
Never
and sweet
simple.
answer questions. This legislation just passed. We have received zero guidance from the Department of Education on the implementation of this new legislation. Again, goes into effect for the 23-24 school year, so no changes until then. But what typically happens with legislation like this, something that's one line in a bill passed by Congress, then results in dozens and dozens of pages of guidance from the Department of Education. And very often they interpret things just as I would. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes they don't interpret things necessarily the way people in Congress thought they should be interpreted. So that is all to say that we have yet to hear from the Department of Education on any of these FAFSA changes. So we're still in kind of a wait and see approach about how all of this plays out. So that is the first caveat. Second caveat is all of these changes are just to the FAFSA form and just address changes in federal financial aid eligibility. Colleges that use the CSS profile form to determine their institutional aid eligibility, these changes don't necessarily affect profile schools at all. Again, remains to be seen, will the profile make any changes to their form, or will the College Board make any changes to the profile form? We don't know that yet. So if your child is applying to colleges that use the profile form, it is very likely that the 401k contributions will still count as untaxed income. So that's caveat number two. And then the other thing that I would just say about this is, so if your 401k contributions are not counted as part of your income when determining financial aid eligibility, theoretically that may make you have a little bit higher financial aid eligibility. This is not going to make, someone who was not going to qualify for financial aid all of a sudden qualify for tens of thousands of dollars of financial aid. It's not going to make that kind of difference. But it could theoretically, contributing more to your 401k could increase your financial aid eligibility somewhat. But you always have to make sure that you are thinking about not just what is best for financial aid eligibility, but what is best for your finances overall, what is best for your family. So put more in your 401k, maybe you qualify for a little bit more financial aid, but now that money's in your 401k and you don't have it available now to actually pay for college. So there's always, pros and cons, and you have to weigh things and look at your financial situation as a whole. Making this move might increase financial aid eligibility. It also makes the money less available to actually pay for college. So do you have other ways to pay for college? It's not going to be kind of a one-for-one result where anything you put into your 401k, now you're going to get it in that much increased financial aid eligibility. That's not going to happen. So do you still have the funds to be able to pay for college while increasing your 401k contribution? You just need to weigh those things out.
And because this always makes my head hurt a little bit,
yes.
When and if all of these changes are in effect in the FAFSA, what year would you need to theoretically start putting more? If you were going to follow this and say, I'm going to put more into my 401k, what's the year when you would need to start doing that? Because it's not this year.
It is actually this year.
Oh, it is. See,
so yes,
it makes my head hurt.
I know. So the FAFSA asks about your income from what they call your prior year income. Such an awkward term, but it's your income from the year 2 years prior to the year you're applying for aid for. So for if you're applying for aid for the school year that starts in 2023, they are looking at your 2021 income. So it is in fact right now.
Right. So if you have a class of 2023, i.e. if you have a sophomore,
yes,
this is the year to do this. If I had the exploding head emoji available to me, I would be playing that right now. But yes.
Yes. And of course, just also to throw the point in there that you do have to apply for financial aid for all 4 years of college,
right.
Based on the year prior to that year. So, even if you have a junior right now and you're thinking, oh, I have a junior, this doesn't apply to me because I'm going to be applying for aid for the 22-23 school year.
Yes.
But remember, you're going to do that based on the current regulations, and then you're going to have to apply for financial aid for their sophomore year of college when the new regulations go into effect.
Right. So this is going to impact me because my son is a junior. It will impact me for his sophomore year of college.
Exactly right. On.
Very interesting. Okay. Awesome.
Oh, and actually, I'm sorry, Beth, can I just throw one more thing in? Because this just reminded me that somebody actually asked about this new legislation and how it would affect some things having to do with the FAFSA. In the last listener question segment we did last month, which I think I did with Sally, you weren't there this week, and I forgot something. And then after this segment was recorded, I was kicking myself for forgetting it, and I was talking about kind of the basics of some of the changes and who it might affect. And a very important group of folks that I totally neglected to mention where the changes might make a big difference for are those families that have multiple children in college at the same time. It could have a big effect on potential financial aid eligibility. Under the current regulations, your expected family contribution is split between all of the kids that you have in college. Under the new regulations, first of all, the expected family contribution is not going to be called that. It's going to be called the student aid index, but it's not going to be split among the kids you have in college. So, currently, if your first child goes to school, you have a $30,000 expected family contribution, and then the next year a younger sibling is also in school, that $30,000 contribution gets split between the two kids. Now they each have a $15,000 contribution and each are eligible for more financial aid. Under the new rules, that split is not going to happen, at least in terms of the awarding of federal financial aid. Schools will have to decide what they want to do with their own institutional aid and how they want to award that. But that's just another big subset of people that these regulations may affect pretty dramatically in terms of their financial aid eligibility. And I totally forgot to mention it last month. So I just wanted to throw it out there so folks are aware of those big changes to come.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't have to really dig into it, but I know that people were initially very much up in arms. But we have some colleagues with twins or multiple kids, and then you have a family like mine where we have two kids, but my stepson is already out of college, and my son will not start college for another 2 years, year and a half. It sort of doesn't seem right? That we will not get a break. We will for two kids to go to college,
Yes.
and we will pay more than if we had had those kids within a year of each other or at the same time, where suddenly we would then pay less. I mean, I can understand both
Yeah.
perspectives, but it is interesting because it does feel kind of fair. I might
Right.
get
Yes.
shot
So
for
that
that.
and that is the argument that the current system is unfair, where it sort of rewards families for having kids close together and punishes those that have kids spaced further apart, and that is not an equitable way to award financial aid. I mean, you could argue that what they ended up doing is to say, okay, so nobody gets the benefit,
Right,
and that's
exactly.
fair. They could have done the flip side and said everyone gets the benefit. If you have two kids, even if they're spaced far apart, we're going to do some sort of accounting for that, which normally isn't done. They decided not to do that. So now everyone is treating
Treated the same way.
equitably,
Yeah.
equitably worse.
It's right, exactly. It's fair to nobody now.
Right.
Yay. That sounds like life a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
All right.
Yes.
What do
Okay.
you
So
got
the
for me?
next question for you, Beth, is from Laura. And she says, are published GPAs on a college's freshman profile usually weighted or unweighted? If a school has a certain GPA cutoff to be admitted into a program, for example, the Kelly School of Business, is that GPA that they advertise usually weighted or unweighted?
So there is no usually. Every school is going to do this according to the way that they want to do it. And I think I always want to point out that data can be manipulated, right? Schools want to present the data in the light that they feel is best for them. We live in a world where somehow, if something is slightly more out of reach, we want it more. And if it looks like we can have it, we don't want it.
Right.
So what that means is that at a lot of these colleges, and I have this happen every year, where families will go out and tour schools and come back and say, but I don't see how he's going to get in anywhere. Everybody's got a 4.0 average or a 3.7 average. And I always have to say we need to take a step back and understand we don't know how they're calculating that. You can ask, and I certainly would
Mhm.
encourage you to do that. So if your son or daughter has a list of schools or your child has a list of schools that they're interested in, it's possible to call them and say, what do you give us an average GPA? What is that based on? Most schools are going to recalculate a GPA using their own system, and those systems are going to be different from school to school, right? Some schools will lift a GPA directly off of a transcript, but then you're dealing with the different systems that all different schools use. So, here where I live, in the town where I live, they're on a 6.0 system. Why? I don't know, but they are. Many schools are on a 4.0 system. I used to read files with schools on an 11 point, on a 10 point. I saw schools with no grades. I saw schools with only letter grades and no pluses and no minuses. Again, why? I don't know, but this is how those schools do it. And colleges are similar. So I would say that you can learn a little from what is published, but I would take it with a huge grain of salt,
Mhm.
and really understand that it's almost impossible to make an apples to apples comparison of your GPA and the school's
Right.
published GPA. Unfortunately, you can't do it. And here's the other challenge, right? So you go to the most selective schools and they are at pains to downplay the level of success of the students that they admit. So they won't really get into GPAs at all. Or if they do, they will say, hey, we see everything. And if you've got a few B's, no big deal. One of the reasons for this, as someone who used to stand up there and say that, is that you really don't know who's in your audience. And you are reviewing each file individually, and you don't want to scare anyone off. You don't want them to feel like, oh my goodness, I have no shot, I'm never going to apply, because even the most successful students could probably walk away thinking that they had no shot. So at those schools, you're trying to downplay. And then there are other schools where if their GPA isn't high enough, people will just dismiss it. Oh, well, then nobody who goes there is smart. That's not interesting to us. Their average kid has a 3.0 or 2.9. So they do their own weighting and judging of the stats, and then they present you with what they think will be most appealing to you. So stats tell you some things, but they don't tell you everything. I think much more helpful are ranges of GPAs and test scores, and kind of being in the middle 50%, depending on the selectivity of the school, is kind of what I would aim to be, middle 50%, slightly higher. Some schools you can get in if you're slightly below the middle 50%. That's when you look at statistics on what percentage of the applicant pool are they admitting. So there's so many different things that go into this mix that essentially, for me anyway, I find those GPAs to be virtually worthless. I mean, it sounds harsh, but unless you understand how it's calculated, you really can't extrapolate. So I think that's the key. You have to understand how it's being calculated.
Right. And if you're, a tenth of a point below, that does not necessarily mean you're not getting in. And if you're a tenth of a point above, that doesn't mean you're a shoo-in, because you don't know what they're doing behind the scenes.
That's exactly right. One statistic that we have thrown out there is that if a school is admitting more than half of their applicant pool, you can make some fairly good assessments about if you are somewhere in the middle 50%, you're probably, could feel pretty good about, okay, I think my chances of getting in here. But when you drop below 50%, that's when things get a whole lot tougher to call. So,
Gotcha.
All right, we have not that much time left, Shannon. Is this other question we have for you, is it really involved, or should we just do another admissions question and save that one for the next?
Yeah, maybe we save it for next time and do an admissions question.
All right, Natalie, we will come back to you next.
That one might take me a while.
Okay.
Okay, Deb's question. Look okay to you, Beth?
Yeah, if it's the next one, it should be fine.
Yeah, okay. Are dual credit courses or AP courses better? Should my student do a mix of both, or a full-time dual credit program if he is interested in attempting to get into some challenging colleges such as Notre Dame and MIT?
Okay, tricky question. So the first part of the question was, which one is better? And I would say that I couldn't really make that assessment because it depends. In some states where they offer this kind of dual enrollment program, it could be a great pathway to a cheaper education and a faster education at potentially the flagship institution in that state or at the state institution. So dual enrollment can be a really good choice for some students, depending on where they want to go. For students targeting some of the most selective schools in the country, and I would put both Notre Dame and MIT in that pool, especially MIT, dual enrollment is frequently not the best way to go. And the reason for that is because, generally speaking, the toughest curriculum is often the one that is offered in the school. So if you are in a school where they have AP courses or they do a full diploma IB program, that is generally going to be preferred to taking courses, doing dual enrollment courses, which, for better or worse, are sometimes viewed as slightly less than at the more selective levels. So if your child is targeting those types of schools, I would say that he's probably better off shooting to go to the highest level available at his high school in all 5 major subjects: math, science, English, history, and foreign language. And if APs are it, then that's what I would encourage him to do. If they have the IB program, which you didn't mention, so they probably don't, the key there is you want to do the full diploma. If you're going to do IBs, you want to do the IB full diploma, not just a couple of IB classes here and there. So again, like, dual enrollment can look really great and really exciting, but it will really depend on the schools that you're applying to, and if you're shooting for that more selective level, not generally what I would advise. All right, Shannon, thank you so much for being here today. As always,
You're so welcome.
you're a perfect partner for these question and answer sessions. I want to thank all of you for submitting your questions. Please submit more. We want them. We want to answer them on the show. Next week, Ian is hosting. If you're interested in the military academies, he's talking about the timeline. We're talking about building a preliminary college list, and we're doing part 2 of our series on financial aid award letters. And don't forget, we are here every Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. Eastern.